Tonight's presentation is on contemplative prayer, which I'm really excited about because this is something that's very dear to my heart. I used to be a Benedictine monk, but as I explained this weekend in my promo, contemplation isn't just for monks and nuns, it's for everyone. And really, I learned contemplation from my mom. She was, and still is, such a devout prayer, and she's always had Jesus within her, and she's always had a special relationship with Him, and that's rubbed off on me, so hopefully that I can share that with you tonight. But really, when we discover Jesus in our own personal relationships with Him, it's like none other. Everyone has their own unique relationship with Him, which is truly special. So I have this close to my heart, and I want to share this with you, this gift of contemplative prayer or contemplation. As I said, this isn't something that's esoteric. You may have heard of contemplation before and thought, what in the world is that? It's the stuff that saints and mystics do, but not lay people. But I'm here to tell you that it is, and that God is calling all of us to further union with Him through contemplation. So what is the essence of contemplation? If I had to give it to you in a nutshell, what is the essence or spirit of contemplation? It's simply this. It's seeking the beloved. It's seeking the one whom our heart loves. And that is none other than Jesus Christ. Our desire for Him, our seeking for Him, our yearning, our longing for Him. The Bible talks a lot about this. And if you've ever read the Song of Songs, it captures that well. There's this love affair between this woman who represents us and Jesus Christ, and the man who is Jesus Christ. And again, that's a calling for all of us. So let me read to you an excerpt from the Song of Songs. Here is the woman who represents us, who represents the church, who represents our personal relationship with Jesus. And she says, "On my bed at night I sought Him, whom my heart loves. I sought Him, but I did not find Him. Let me rise then and go about the city, through the streets and squares. Let me seek Him whom my soul loves. I sought Him, but I did not find Him. The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. Him whom my soul loves, have you seen Him? Hardly had I left when I found Him whom my soul loves. I held Him and would not let Him go until I brought Him to my mother's house, to the chamber of her who conceived me. I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and the doves of the field, do not awaken or stir up love until it is ready." That is the essence of contemplation. Who is it that you seek? The beloved. Who is it that your heart, your soul seeks and wants and desires? So much so that you would go out in the city streets and squares and say, "Where is He? I desire Him. I want Him. I need Him." It's none other than Jesus. That is the spirit of contemplation. That is its essence. And concretely, what that's going to look like is that you're going to want to spend time with Jesus alone, in solitude, mostly in silence. I want to spend time with Him. I want to spend time with my best friend, my lover, my all in all. I found Him, and I found Him through the gift of contemplation. That is what it's all about. Now, I say that contemplation usually is in silence, because sometimes we're going to be talking to Him. In fact, St. Teresa of Avila defines contemplation as nothing but an intimate sharing between two friends. That's contemplation. So what do you do when you're with your best friend? You talk with him or her, you share, but not always. You're also in silence. And of course, God speaks to us in the silence. So if we want to hear Him, whom our heart seeks, we're going to be quiet and listen to Him. And what is He going to tell us? Oh, He's full of surprises and wonders. So that is the spirit of contemplation. That is its essence, that we're seeking the beloved whom our heart seeks. That is Jesus. But I also want to give you details tonight about what that looks like specifically. Because contemplation and the spiritual life in general, it's so important to know what the ins and outs are so that we can track our progress, so that we can advance in prayer. You know, prayer isn't just a dead-end street in which you learn certain prayers and that's it, and you never go beyond that. God wants us to be in full union with Himself. So we advance from different stages of prayer to the next. And I'm going to explain that tonight. Let me read to you, first of all, a definition of contemplation or contemplative prayer from this glossary. It's from the Collected Works of St. John of the Cross. And it says this: contemplation, the communication of God untied to the senses or the particular. So contemplation, it's receiving God without the use of the senses. It's God coming into us without being perceived by the senses. You see, contemplation, it's not about perceiving God through what we understand and the senses and particular thoughts and concepts, but rather He enters into us passively, which is so neato keen. But let me explain that in just a moment. So here, this is communication of God untied to the senses or the particular, received passively by the Spirit in an attitude of faith and love, of general loving attention. So it's not particular thoughts, it's not particular meditations on God, using our brains and intellect, but a general loving attention. As if, God, I know you're here, and you are in my presence, and I'm aware of that, and it's just this general awareness that I have of God's presence. And somehow He's coming into my soul. So it continues on. It says, may be referred to as infused because the soul receives it passively, just as one receives sunlight by doing no more than opening the shutters. That is incredible. Okay, so what does that look like? You know, sunlight shining through the window. You open up the blinds and it shines on you, and you don't have to do anything. All you got to do is just soak up the rays. That's God shining Himself through the window into your soul without you having to do anything. That's easy. That's awesome. I want to pray that way. Okay, and not only that, it's the most effective way of praying because He's doing all the work. And if God's doing all the work, you know it's super effective. So we'll be talking more about that. That is how contemplation works, rather than us doing all the work. Now, it talks about how this is a loving general awareness in which you're not particularly thinking about God. It's not about concepts, racking your brain, picking up a meditation book and saying, okay, yeah, that's God. Okay, God, this is what I understand of you. But rather, you just receive Him. And you can't really put words to describe it. And it's not something you necessarily can put your finger on. But it's awareness of God. Let me give you an example. You go outside, and it's a beautiful night, and you see this beautiful sunset with all the colors, and it's incredible. And you go, wow. And you just feel something deep within your soul. And this is what I like to call a God moment. You know what I'm talking about? You ever had those God moments where you just go, wow, thank you, God. Okay? Now, that's not something that you can easily describe or tell people about. In fact, you probably don't want to tell people about it because it would take away from something. But yet, it was so deep and so real. That is contemplation. That's a moment of contemplation. So if you've ever had that, enjoy it. And not only that, but soak it up for all it's worth. Milk it. When you receive those moments, those are special moments in which God is trying to draw us closer to union with Himself. He's saying, come hither. Come to me, my sweet darling. And He wants us close to His heart. This is the stuff mystics and saints are made of. You know, the St. Faustinas, the St. Teresa of Avila's, and so forth. You know how they had this divine betrothal with Jesus? How did they get there? They took advantage of those moments, and they made the most of them. So don't run away. Don't check your cell phone and go, wow, that was cool. Okay, now I got to check my texts. or turn on the radio. Try to stay in that moment as long, because that is how contemplation grows within you. And pretty soon, those kinds of things will happen more often, more frequently, and deeper. And then you're on that road to mystical heights. So that's an example of contemplation. Here's what St. John of the Cross, the master on contemplation, along with St. Teresa of Avila, here's how he defined contemplation. He said, it's a secret inflow of God. That's it. It's a secret inflow of God. Oh, and he adds peaceful and loving too. A secret, peaceful, loving inflow of God. So it's secret. It's imperceptible. That's a huge part of contemplation. It's imperceptible. It's not perceived through the senses. You see, because if God needs to speak through our senses, that's an inferior way in which He's communicating Himself to us. He is pure spirit. Anyway, He comes in secretly and hiddenly. Which is why so many times in moments of contemplation, you may be sitting there thinking, I'm just twiddling my thumbs, nothing's going on, what's wrong? Well, actually, God is doing more in your soul in that moment than you can possibly realize. So it's secret. It's also loving because it's God. And it's also peaceful. Such a key indicator that you're entering into contemplation is peace. When people tell me about their spiritual lives and they start talking about contemplation, they say to me, Robert, I wasn't thinking about anything, but I felt peace. And I go, ding, 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 ding. That's contemplation. You were in it. You weren't thinking about God. You weren't thinking about any particular thing. But there was this incredible peace that you felt. Bingo, that was God entering into your soul. Secretly. So much so that it was hardly perceptible. But it changes us from the inside out. That's what's so great about contemplation. It changes us from the inside out. And that's what makes the saints saints. That they started with contemplation, God changed their souls. Now they could go out to the world and change it. That's called contemplation in action. I'll be talking more about that next week. But anyway, this is secret, peaceful, loving inflow of God. It's imperceptible, it's subtle, and yet it's real. Now, in the beginning, these moments of contemplation, or God moments, whatever you want to call them, are not going to last for very long. They might last for just a few seconds, or a minute or two, but not for very long. And it's not as if you're there forever. Maybe they last forever. Or maybe they'll last a long time. The saints actually could have those moments half the day or an entire day. But again, the main thing is to make the most of it and stay in that moment as long as you can. Because God is calling you in a special way. And not to run away or distract yourself, but to really milk it for all it's worth so that you can grow in that contemplation in further union with Him. If that moment comes up and you run away from it, or you ignore it, or you try to meditate, or you try to distract yourself, it saddens God. Because He wants an intimate relationship with you. Now, in taking advantage of this time, not only is it important to make the most of those times when they come up, but also to lend ourselves to those moments. And how do we do that? It's by making a commitment every day to contemplative prayer. I'm going to spend 15, 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Come what may. In which now, I'm just going to enter into solitude and silence with God. And now those moments can happen more frequently. But if we're constantly on the go, distracting ourselves, busy with activity, we're never going to allow God that opportunity to speak to our souls. So part of it is just lending ourselves to that opportunity. And if you like nature, and if that's a way to connect with God, I say to you, go out in nature as often as you can. If you go out in your backyard and you look at your flowers and you always feel something within your soul, do it. Do it as often as you can. Spend as much time as you can out there. Or you have a prayer room or a special place where you like to pray and you feel connected with God, do it as often as you can. Make the most of those God opportunities, those God spots, and those things in which God is speaking to you. Now, in contrast to contemplation is what's called discursive meditative prayer, or simply meditation. So you have meditation, which is a beginning form of prayer, and contemplation, which is a more advanced type of prayer. Now, that doesn't mean that you will never meditate again once you enter into contemplation. Often we will go back and forth. But we will progressively become more contemplative as time goes on. But we'll also go back into meditation from time to time as we grow. But what God is doing through meditation is He's weaning us away from that into contemplation. So what is meditative prayer? Well, it's using our brains, it's using our intellects to figure things out. So I pick up a book, I read it, this is how I understand God, this is how I communicate with God. I have a prayer book in which I read the prayers. And this is the way I understand God, this is how I'm communicating with Him. I read the rote prayers. The rosary with its mysteries, what do? We're meditating on those mysteries. Or the Bible. You can pick up a Bible and now you're meditating on those words, and that is how you're communicating with God. So it's completely active. You're doing all the work and you're engaging your brain. That's called discursive meditation or simply meditation. And that is in the beginning stages of prayer. And then St. John of the Cross says, pretty soon after that, not very long after that, God then starts calling souls into contemplation. Whereas with contemplation, it's all passive. God is doing all of the work. So let me illustrate this by giving you a very famous image that St. Teresa of Avila shared in one of her books. And that is, she compared the prayer to like watering a garden. Okay, and these are the different ways of praying, and it's like watering a garden. Okay, keep in mind, she lived in 16th century Spain, so some of the imagery might seem a little old-fashioned, but you'll get it. So what's the most basic, hardest way in which we water a garden? Well, you take a bucket, you go to a well, you draw water from the well, you take the bucket back to your garden, and you water it. Now that takes a lot of work, doesn't it? That's arduous and it's laborious. That she compares to meditative prayer. Okay? But then she says there's a better way of gardening, of watering your garden, and this is like entering into contemplation. And now you have aqueducts, or channels, or, old-fashioned irrigation system, and they had a crank. Okay, and you had to crank it in order to let the water go through these channels into your garden, into their irrigation system. Now that's way easier than drawing water with a bucket from a well. Okay? However, you still have to crank. And she says that's the beginning stages of contemplation. While a higher form of contemplation then is like if you had a river or a stream that was diverted into your garden. Now you don't have to do anything. The river or the garden or the stream is going to do all the work and water it. And finally she says the most effective, most powerful, easiest way is if God sends a rainstorm to your garden and sends a deluge, and all you have to do is just stand there. And it waters your garden completely. That's how she compares prayer life. The bucket, that's discursive prayer. In the end, you've got this advanced contemplation in which God is reigning on the garden. I don't know about you, but I want the one in which God is sending the rainfall to the garden. It's easier, it's more effective. That's contemplation. So that's the difference between meditation and contemplation. And what God then, the natural progression, is that we start off with a beginning type of prayer in which we meditate and we engage our minds, and then He moves us slowly, sometimes more quickly, into contemplation. Now, I do want to say a few words about praying the Rosary, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, Lectio Divina, and that sort of thing. So I'm not saying tonight that you want to completely dismiss those and never do those things again. Totally. No, you do want to. For me, what I do is I have a separate time in which I pray contemplatively, mainly in the morning and throughout the day. But then I have another separate time in which I pray the Rosary, Divine Mercy Chaplet, particularly when I exercise. Because obviously those are important prayers as well. But keep in mind, the further we go along in union with God, the more contemplative we're going to be. And it gets to the point where you're just like, wow, I got some time. It's some quiet time alone with the Lord. I don't care if I'm in my house or on the road, in the church, wherever. It's just a quiet moment with God, and you need that, and you rely on that. And what's interesting is that when people tell me about their spiritual lives, is that when they don't do that and they make time for the Lord, they miss it. They can feel the difference. It's as if something is void in their life, not quite there. It's because they're not spending time with the Lord and letting Him enter contemplatively. Okay, so that's the difference between meditative prayer and contemplative prayer. Now, what are the signs? St. John of the Cross gives us 3 signs that tell us whether or not God is moving us away from meditative prayer into contemplation. So there are 3 signs. The first sign is that you can no longer meditate. Okay, do you ever feel that way, where you pick up a book, that old prayer book that you've got, okay, the mysteries of the rosary or praying the Bible, it's very hard to do or impossible or difficult. All you want to do is just, instead of doing this, you just want to, I just want to spend time with you, God. Okay? The book has brought you to the water. It's time to drink. You know God. You're in relationship with Him. You don't need the book anymore. You don't need those meditative prayers anymore. You've got Him. Okay, so that's key. That's the first thing, is that you can no longer meditate. It's hard. It becomes difficult. It wears out your spirit. Okay, the second sign is that you don't draw satisfaction the same way you did from those prayers before. In the beginning stages, maybe you had a prayer book that you loved, and you read every day incessantly, and you love that. And one day you picked it up, and it was just like, I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of this. It just feels dry. It feels like I'm really racking my brain. It feels like I just want to put it down. Okay? You might feel that way. And God is saying, yes, put it down. Don't think anymore. Just be. Just be with me. Be still and know that I am God. That's all I want right now. That's all I've ever wanted from you. I don't want you to come up with a book and say, God, this is how I understand you. This is how I love you. It's perfectly described right here in this book. Would you tell that to your best friend? No, you'd go right up to him and say, this is how I feel about you. I love you. You're great. That's what God wants with us. That is contemplative prayer. So, you don't have that same satisfaction. It's burdensome. It wears out the spirit. The third sign that God is moving you away from discursive meditation is that you have a greater, what they call, solicitude for God. Which means you have a greater concern about doing God's will and pleasing Him. So at the same time that this is going on, you're really concerned about doing God's will and pleasing Him and loving Him. And the irony is that people now are stepping away from their old ways of prayer, their usual ways of praying. They're entering into contemplation in which they feel like they're doing nothing, and they feel like they're backsliding. They feel like they're not doing anything at all. They feel like they're being lazy. So at the very moment in which God is calling them into contemplation, they want to run back to their familiar ways of praying with meditation. And St. John of the Cross is saying, no, don't do that, because that's like a baby being weaned away from his mother's breast, going back to his mother's breast. So you don't want to do that. You want to continue on with this dark faith. In fact, St. John of the Cross calls this the dark night of the sense. Okay, this is where the whole dark night thing comes in with St. John of the Cross. And there are 2 dark nights. And the first dark night is called the dark night of the sense, which is very common for most of us. The dark night of the soul, that's really advanced. I'll talk more about that later. But the dark night of the sense, most people go through. And that is, God is weaning us away from meditative prayer, but now we're stepping into contemplation, and oh, it seems so unfamiliar. What do I do now? I don't feel like meditating. It's so hard for me to do. And I just want to be with God, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just sitting here. I'm doing nothing. Oh, Jesus, please help me. Sound familiar? Okay, but at this moment, God is getting you to be contemplative. So don't run. Don't go back to your old ways. This is called that dark contemplation. Now it's kind of this darkness because it's unfamiliar. So really the dark night is something that most of us is going to experience on one level or another during our lives. Okay? And as soon as He can, God's going to introduce that into our spiritual lives. So don't run away from that. So those are the three signs that God is taking you away from meditation to contemplation. 1, you can't meditate anymore. It's difficult. 2, you don't draw the same satisfaction as you once did from meditative prayer. And 3, you have a greater concern about serving and loving the Lord. Those are the 3 signs. Okay, and I want to read to you from St. John of the Cross. I haven't read to you from him tonight yet, but regarding all of this, okay, he says, the attitude necessary in the night of sense, that's what I'm talking about, is to pay no attention to discursive meditation, since this is not the time for it. They should allow the soul to remain in rest and quietude, even though it may seem obvious to them that they are doing nothing and wasting time. And even though they think this disinclination to think about anything is due to their laxity. So people think that they're being lazy, that they're wasting time. Through patience and perseverance in prayer, they will be doing a great deal without activity on their part. He goes on, all that is required of them here is freedom of soul, that they liberate themselves from the impediment and fatigue of ideas and thoughts, and care not about thinking and meditating. They must be content simply with a loving and peaceful attentiveness to God, and live without the concern, without the effort, and without the desire to taste or feel Him. All these desires disquiet the soul and distract it from the peaceful, quiet, and sweet idleness of the contemplation that is being communicated to it. That's what's going on. So don't run back. Don't go back to your familiar ways. God is sweetly and lovingly communicating Himself to your soul. In the quiet. In the darkness. In the unfamiliarity of it all. As I said, it looks like this. I'm here, Lord. I love you. I need you. Thank you, Jesus. Yes, we are together. It's as simple as that. And I want you. Come into me. This is awesome. It's understandable why people would miss it when you don't have it anymore, or you've gone on a vacation and you haven't prayed in a while. We all need that. We all need Him. And it's so simple. I want to stress that. It is so simple. We don't have to make things difficult. Just make it easy. Make it easy on yourself. Make it easy on the Lord. It's great. Oh, it's the best. If you go home tonight and just say, I just want to be by myself with Jesus for a while, woo! He is so good. Oh, He is so good. I go home at night And I just want to sit on the couch and I want to relax and I just want to be with him. I'll talk about him, about how the day has gone and whatever. But you know what usually happens? Is I'll just say a few words and then all of a sudden I have this urge to just zip the lip. Okay, because I don't want to talk anymore. It's like noise. Because I feel him within my heart and it's just so profound and so deep that if I start talking, it's just... And then he starts just coming into my soul. And you may have had that experience. And you're longing for more of it. So I just say, go with it. Okay, just go with it. All right, what else? Well, I mentioned this before, but to advance in contemplative prayer, there's also an aspect of discipline as well. To say, I'm going to dedicate this time every day, 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, however long that I think God is telling me I should dedicate, to contemplative prayer every day. And St. Teresa of Avila, she said, when we embark on our prayer lives, to do it and stay committed no matter what, come heck or high water. Even if you're sitting there feeling like you're twiddling your thumbs, doing nothing and accomplishing nothing, to just stick with it because you are. And here's the thing about contemplation, is that it waxes and wanes, it ebbs and flows, it fluctuates. And this is really key. So one moment you may feel like you're in the pocket with God. You feel like you're really connected. You feel His love, you feel His presence. And then 5 minutes later, your mind is wandering and you're completely distracted and it's completely dry and arid. Have you ever had that experience? Often within the same prayer session. Okay? I can tell you, the same prayer within the same prayer session. Maybe I'm in the adoration chapel. One moment I feel like, wow, things are just rocking and rolling with the Lord. And 5 minutes later, I'm thinking about horse racing. And how my dad's horses are going to do this year. Okay? That's all part of contemplation. Distractions are a part of contemplation. So don't worry about that. A wandering mind, that's all part of contemplation. That's all part and parcel of prayer and contemplation. So don't be alarmed if that happens. Okay? And I'm going to talk more how to deal with distractions next week. But the thing is don't give up. That's the bottom line. So there are going to be periods in which it's arid too. But you notice in the Psalms, like it says in Psalm 63, like a land parched, dry, and without water, so my soul longs for you. That was written by David the psalmist. That is the epitome of contemplative prayer. So sometimes contemplative prayer can be filled with consolation, where you're feeling in the pocket with God, you just have this God chill come over you. You might even cry, you might even get a tingle in your face, and it's like, wow, this is awesome. But in other moments, it's dry and it's arid, and you're just crying out and saying, where are you, Lord? I have plenty of those moments. But in that desire and in that yearning, that is pure contemplation. So contemplation takes different forms. It runs the gamut. Keep that in mind. That way, I don't want you to run into contemplation saying, well, it's nothing but one consolation after another, and if I don't feel that way, I'm just going to quit contemplating, quit this way of praying. No, that's all part of it. In fact, St. Teresa of Avila said that. She said, when I pray during my prayer session, it seems like my mind wanders from one side of the world to the other. Now, if the great St. Teresa of Avila said that, then we can say that. The main thing is don't give up. So I urge you to make a commitment and say, I'm going to spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour with you, Lord, every day in contemplation. Not praying the rosary, not with the Bible, not with a book, but just me and you in silence and solitude. Now, if you want to talk to Jesus, that's also a part of contemplation as well. That is a very crucial part. In fact, sometimes when I enter into contemplation, it's like I just got to tell the Lord what's going on with me, and I have to spill my guts. And I just keep going and going and going, and I hear this voice, and it's the Lord saying, keep going, you're on a roll. Okay? So sometimes you just need to do that. But at other times, it's very apparent the Spirit will just, all of a sudden, you just feel a change where you just want to be quiet. And you want to be in silence with the Lord. Okay, so conversation is very important to the contemplative life. And that's a great way of starting off your prayer session contemplatively. You can start it off with silence, but if you feel compelled, just talk to Jesus for a little bit, and that's a way of priming the pump. Okay, and then after a while, you'll enter into the silence. That's the natural progression with a contemplative prayer session. All right, so make that commitment and say, come what may, I'm going to stick to it. Now, it may seem like nothing is happening, as I've said before, but this is what the spiritual writers, and there's a famous book with this title, it's called The Cloud of Unknowing. Okay? In which, by not knowing, you know. You know God by unknowing. Huh? Seems like, what are you saying, Robert? That's a paradox. Yeah, in not knowing, I know God. Okay, that's the cloud of unknowing, because God is speaking to us through what's called dark contemplation or dark faith or dark knowledge. We're walking in this dark. Okay, it's a paradox. As I shared before, St. John of the Cross uses this window image in which the sun is shining through. So here's what he means. Here's what I'm getting at. He uses this image of God is shining through the window like sun. Okay? Now, the sunlight is completely undetectable. It's invisible until there's dust. Okay? And all of a sudden you see the sunlight because your room is dirty. Okay? Because there's dust floating around, and you probably should take care of that dust. But the light is reflecting off the dust, which is our senses. Those are our books, those are our blogs, those are our meditations by which we can perceive God. Okay? Is the dust. But unfortunately, there's dust in the room, so what is that doing? That's actually impeding God's pure light and pure spirit, which He's trying to infuse into our soul. So the less we rely on that dust to show us God and that light, the better off we are, because God is sending His pure spirit into our hearts. So here's what He says. The following example is a clear illustration of this. In observing a ray of sunlight stream through the window, we notice that the more it is pervaded with particles of dust, the clearer and more palpable and sensible it appears to the senses. So the dirtier your room is, the more you can see God. Yet obviously, the sun ray in itself is less pure, clear, simple, and perfect in that it is full of so many specks of dust. If there is nothing visible off which the ray of light can reflect, nothing will be seen. If the ray then were to enter through one window and go out another without striking any quantitative object, it would be invisible. Yet the ray of sunlight would be purer and cleaner than when it is more manifestly perceived, because it is filled with visible objects. So the less dust we have in that room, the better off we are. But guess what? We're not going to be able to perceive God the same way. This is where the dark night comes in. Okay, but that's good, because God is pure spirit. And St. John of the Cross says, because He's pure spirit, the only way in which we can receive Him fully is through faith, not through the senses. That's an inferior way in which God is communicating to us. So, we receive Him by pure faith. Oh, now you're getting the dark night, right? Because you've heard this stuff before, but you didn't know what it was. So this is the dark night in which He's speaking to us through the darkness. And just to sum it up in one sentence, in case you totally did not understand that symbolism, here's what He says. The higher and more sublime the divine light, the darker it is to our intellect. So the higher and more sublime the divine light, the darker it is to our intellect. So this is one of the most important points of the entire night, and that is God communicates best through the darkness. God communicates best through the darkness. Darkness is light. Go figure. Okay, why? Because God is pure light. And when we meet light in its purest form, face to face, guess what? We're blinded by the light. Blinded by the light. Okay? God is pure light, and when we walk into that pure light and we meet that light face to face, it blinds us. Our eyes are too weak to handle it, but guess what? We're receiving more of God than ever. That's the paradox. That's the wonder. That's the mystery. That's the amazing aspect of this. All right, that's the dark night. So, here's what he says to sum up this. He says, because of their weakness, individuals feel thick darkness and more profound obscurity the closer they come to God, just as they would feel greater darkness and pain because of the weakness and impurity of their eyes, the closer they approach the immense brilliance of the sun. So he compares God to the sun. Imagine if you look directly at the sun. Of course, you were told as a kid never to look directly at the sun, right? Because it's just going to fry your eyes, right? We don't do that. But imagine God being the sun and you look directly in the sun. What's going to happen? This spiritual light is so bright and so transcendent that it blinds and darkens the natural intellect. That's what happens when God gives us His pure light. It blinds us. Because our eyes are not able to handle that. That is a good thing, and that is how the darkness comes about. So you're really not actually walking in darkness. You're walking in the light more than ever. And God wants us to continue doing that. Now, as I said, there's what's called the dark night of the sense, and most of us enter into that. But for the advanced contemplatives, like Mother Teresa, did you ever hear the story? At the last 30 years of her life or so, it was one dark night where it was very, very difficult for her, in which God didn't show her anything. Imagine not only having all the familiar meditative ways being taken away in which you understand God, but all the contemplative ways. All the ways in which you understand God are completely swept away and you feel abandoned by God. That's what's called the dark night of the soul. And that's very advanced because that is a completely unadulterated experience of God. It is pure light which completely blinds us and we walk in the darkness. But guess what? We were receiving all of Him. It's just one, literally, highway to heaven in which He's infusing all of His love into our soul. Okay? That's really advanced. That's the dark night of the soul. So all of this is called dark contemplation. And again, the upshot of all of this is when this happens to you, don't run away. Don't run away from the moment. Don't run away from God. Don't go back to your familiar ways of meditating. But keep at it. Because God is giving more of Himself than ever. And that's the beautiful thing about it. Now, as I said, God is pure spirit. So I'm just going to end with this. For St. John of the Cross, it all comes down to faith. He says that God is pure spirit, and the only way in which we can receive Him fully is through faith. Again, if we have to perceive Him through our senses, that's an inferior way in which He's communicating Himself to us. He's kind of like, stooping down to our level so that we can understand Him. But if we meet Him as He is, it's going to be imperceptible. So that's where the darkness comes in. And the only way in which we can receive Him fully is through faith. Complete, blind faith. I know You're there, even if everything is taken away from me, God. I believe in You, I love You, I know You're there. Here's what St. John of the Cross says. Those who want to reach union with God should advance neither by understanding, nor by support of their own experience, nor by feeling or imagination, but by belief in God's being. For God's being cannot be grasped by the intellect, appetite, imagination, or any other sense, nor can it be known in this life. The most that can be felt and tasted of God in this life is infinitely distant from God and the pure possession of Him. And then he quotes St. Paul, "No eye has ever seen, nor ear heard, nor has the human heart or thought ever grasped what God has prepared for those who love Him. Okay. So there you have it. That's the dark night in a nutshell, if you've ever wondered. But hopefully that literally enlightens you. Okay, and in your prayer life, and that enriches it. So now you can go forth and enter into contemplation and know what's going on. See, it's so how important it is to know what's going on, the dynamics, so that you don't give up or think that all is a loss or that you're doing nothing. Love how St. John of the Cross says, yeah, those souls who enter the dark night, they think they're doing nothing. But actually you're accomplishing a lot. So really it comes down to this. Just spend time with Jesus. Just put aside the book, the journal, the blog, or whatever, and just be. Just be with Him. Be still and know that He is God.